Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Dandelion Dynasty, Book 4, Speaking Bones, Chapters 5 and 6, Into the Barrows and That Which Cannot Be Heard. In these chapters, we have got a hero's journey, and we have got a wild ability that animals have that is silent but makes you feel as if you are communing with actual gods. What? Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. What's up, Kyle? I'm starting super late because of computer issues. Kyle is here in the chat apologizing for the emotional journey I am about to go through on this book because he just finished rereading it. And that is certainly an intimidating apology. So strap in, ladies and gentlemen. So these two chapters actually, when you really stop and think about it, not a whole lot actually happens. And this is a rare section where I'm sure I will be able to do an hour, because I always do. But oftentimes with this series, there have been moments where I have started an episode and I'm already like, how am I going to talk about everything that I read? There's no way. But this is a really different set of chapters that sort of stretch some things out. So chapter 5 starts off with Tanto, Thera's son. And you may remember from the previous chapters that we covered, Tanto has been like kind of obsessed with this concept from the legends of the original like attempts at humanity that the gods have made, and the fifth evolution, so to speak, which like destroyed themselves with these incredible weapons that they just kind of went way too far with destruction because they had everything else provided for and they didn't have to focus on survival, and they wound up focusing instead on doing things that were harmful. And that, like, these weapons were so out of control that they don't even like to speak of them. But Tanto has it in his head that these weapons are definitely real and that they are potentially a way for his people to wind up victorious over the Liuku. Now, this is a kind of fascinating thing for me because I genuinely don't really understand this kind of mindset. And I don't even mean like, you know, in terms of this is a kid and it's hard for me to think like a kid, but more, and I think that part of this is the difference in the way he is raised in a tradition that takes stories so seriously, and that legends and myths are treated as a very real thing. But he asked, I can't remember who it was that he was talking to who had told the story, but it might have been Razutana, or maybe it was Sataari. I think it was Sataari. And he was asking her for details about the weapon, and she was sort of disapproving until he kind of tried to like reassure her. Oh, I only want to know what the weapons were so that I know that's not what my mother was working on or whatever. But she tells him when he asks about one specific weapon that I think she said could make like birds and garinafins fall dead from the sky. And I don't recall any other details beyond that, but it was a specific weapon, but he had to like ask about it because they otherwise don't really like to discuss this particular period in their history because it's considered like bad luck. Sort of a, just the less said about it, the better. And the concept to me of hearing about this like mythical weapon and then attaching all of your hopes to it, it's just wild. Like I'm really surprised at the direction this is going for this kid. I shouldn't be that surprised because Tanto, honestly, he is a kid, you know, and I'm trying to see him through that lens and understand that. It's hard for me, but he has a child's understanding. And as we had seen, when he finds out what it was that really happened that allowed him to be rescued, and that they knew they had to lie to him so that he would be able to perform his role as convincingly as he did, he was really insulted kind of at the fact that he wasn't trusted to pull off this, like, the conspiracy, really, for lack of a better word. And, you know, the thing is, probably they're right. He is... I just don't think that was the wrong move, and I find it really interesting how personally he takes it. There's a really prideful streak in him that I have to see as like a potential fatal flaw. I'm concerned about it at this point. Let's just say that. So it feels like he's going after this weapon because he feels otherwise so completely powerless in this situation that even though it's just a myth and it's chasing after something that he doesn't know where it is or what form it would really even take, he is still going to try because the alternative is doing nothing and he can't stand that. And as somebody who tends to be very like action driven, I really do get that sense of like, I need to be doing anything. Even if it doesn't really make sense, if I'm moving and taking action, I will feel better. On the other hand, though, this just feels like such a thin and flimsy thing to base hopes on, that the fact it has caught his imagination is really... It just, I guess, it shows us how hopeless he is. What it reminds me of, and forgive me for making Harry Potter references, but this is reminding me of Harry's obsession with the Deathly Hallows in the final book, and the way that he began to grow certain that if he were able to collect all three of the Hallows, he would be able to win the war and solve everything. And it just becomes almost an illness. Like it's a sickness that causes him to lose sight of anything else that's like relevant or important until something happens and he gets sort of like knocked upside the head and reminded what actually matters in his life. And I don't feel like that's the direction we're going here. This could easily have been the sort of thing where he gets preoccupied with a particular thing and then is reminded what matters. His what matters aren't really around anymore. Like, he doesn't even know who is still alive and who isn't. Everything that mattered that he would have put on that list is gone. And I just feel like he's in a very different position. He has nothing left to lose. So what we have is he lies to Razutana about feeling ill. Everybody is going to be going on this sort of, organize the children to go to the shore to catch brine shrimp and dig for marsh clams. So honestly, that sounds kind of fun. I'm sure it's like tough work, but it's a sort of thing where I just miss the beach, I think is what it is. But he tells her that he's ill and has to like really balance, I don't feel good with, but it's not that serious. I just need to rest. And I like that he is lying, but he's clinging to the logogram from Mutager, which is about like doing the right thing. And I feel like this is just a symbol of him rationalizing to himself, like, yes, I'm lying, but it's for good reasons. And she asks if there's anything you want to eat when I get back. And he requests shrimp paste in scrambled eggs with, let's see, fat that she says something about how I'll use moon fur rat fat instead of tallow. And can you add bits of crispy fried skin? And honestly, as much as some of this sounds terrible, it's the kind of thing where I'm like, I bet that's fucking fire. I bet those are really good. So, and he also requests like mountain, tern eggs are too small. Can you get something bigger? And there are some ducks. And it feels like kind of what he's doing is asking for some things that are going to be difficult and maybe keep her out of his way a little bit longer. So he takes off, and he has been putting aside food and like saving up a store so that he's got a little cash to carry with him. He practiced his slingshot and tracking skills with Nalu until he was almost as good a hunter as his friend. He studied with Sataari until he was sure he knew how to find the softest spots in copses and dig until water seeped out and filled the hole. He begged for lessons from Razutana on how to filter dirty water with a skull cup filled with sand and pebbles so that it became potable. I would love to know that trick. He dried the segmented roots of the kogon grass in the sun and secreted the pieces in a leather pouch, knowing that no hunter or warrior would go on a journey without a supply of the herb good for so many injuries and illnesses. And this is kind of fascinating to me. Like, as much as he's a kid, he really did his homework. I appreciate the foresight. It makes sense that he would be this aware of the dangers because he's lived in a world where this is, you know, when you read about kids like running away into the woods, a lot of the time they're leaving home, a very safe, comfortable place where everything has been sort of easy to access without having to put much labor in. And instead, he's somebody who has grown up living off the land and making do and has been in danger. So it makes sense that he would take this really, really seriously and be well prepared. So he sets off by himself, and he starts off at a kind of fast pace that he knows he's going to eventually have to slow down, but he just wants to get as far away as he can, as quick as he can. And then he kneels and he begins to pray. And we find out he has been composing this prayer in his mind for months. I come not to taunt the trapped ghosts or to challenge the gods. I wish to beg for a favor. The Liuku are following the path of wickedness first trod by the arrogant people of the Fifth Age. They have not moved the site of Tatan in a generation, relying on the labor of slaves for sustenance and pleasure. They have driven the Aegon into the remotest corners of Gonde, hoarding good grazing for themselves. They have become infatuated with city ships, monstrous machines brought here by evil-hearted strangers contemptuous of the people of the scrublands. And here the boy paused, wondering if the gods might reject him for his blood ties to those strangers from beyond the seas. But surely the gods could see that Admiral Krita was nothing like his mother, and his mother's people were victims of the Liuku too, weren't they? He shook off his doubts and pressed on. And this is the question, right? Like, everything that he is accusing the Liuku of, the Dara are even more guilty of. And I guess his faith here is that the only God that he needs to worry about is the Allfather, and he doesn't need to concern himself with whether or not, like, his... what I'm sort of thinking about is the fact that the Dara gods can't come here. The Wall of Storms is also a barrier for them, right? Unless they decide to give up their godhood and become mortal. So I'm wondering if he sort of sees it the same way, that like the god here doesn't care about what the Dara people do so much, because they're down there in a different, like, territory that he isn't concerning himself with. All he cares about is what happens in Gonde, and he would disapprove of people living this way in Gonde. So, you know what I'm saying? And they must be confronted, lest the darkness marking the end of the fifth age once again descend upon the scrublands. I have come to this forbidden place in search of those mighty weapons once wielded by the haughty chiefs of the last age. The shamans say the weapons of the fifth age were unnatural and wicked, but I do not agree. My mother always told me there is nothing inherently good or wicked in the nature of tools, for they only serve to amplify what is already present in the hearts of humankind. The Liuku are wicked and seek to enslave, and in their hands the city ships of Dara further evil. My parents are good and seek to free the Aegon, and in their hands the weapons of Dara bolster good. We show our character not by the weapons we choose, but through the purpose for which we fight and manner in which we wield them. And then he mentions Aefir and Kikisavo. You disapproved of their quest, but were moved by their courage and pure hearts and gifted them valuable tools so that people would have warmth in their tents, light in their pits, weapons to defeat predators, food to sustain their strength. And you took paradise away, but handed back Aefir and Kikisavo the tools to construct new bubbles of paradise in the harsh landscape. And this is a really interesting way to look at it. And what he asks basically is, I want to go on a quest. So if you'll let me into the city, you can test me and then judge me the way that you judged them. My heart is pure, and once the Liuku have been defeated, I will return and lay the borrowed weapons to rest. And what I'm interested in here is, like, what follows feels very much like he is being tested. Like, he kind of low-key got exactly what it was he was asking for, which is remarkable. And it just seems as if the gods are watching. And I'm really curious whether or not, if Ken Liu is going to write the Gonde gods, or if he is going to stick to the Dara gods POVs only. So Tanto hikes through the woods and eventually comes out among the barrows. And it is unclear to me exactly how many days pass. I'm going to go ahead and say, in total, by the time he lays down at the end of this chapter, thinking that he's going to die, 2 weeks, maybe? Week and a half? It's longer than I would have expected when he set out on this quest. I think I would have expected maybe 5 days max. And I kind of enjoy that it's longer than that. So he's heading in, and he's already kind of like feeling a little bit trepidatious about what he's doing and trying to keep his head aware that it's only going to get harder, so I can't start to waver now. And as he heads in, the barrows are just kind of like, they're taking his breath away, is the way it's written. It's the kind of thing that I think, having not seen something like this, you probably aren't ever going to be able to understand the effect unless you are in the presence of something like it. And everything is so regularly shaped and so purposeful. And he's never seen anything like it before. And he wonders if this is what a Dara city looks like. And I'm always fascinated by people who have never been to like a real city and how impossible it is for them to imagine something like a skyscraper. You know, like this is something that comes up in Song of Ice and Fire, where John is with the wildlings and Ygritte and him pass, like, I think it's just a windmill. And she asks if it's a castle, because they just don't have buildings north of the wall the same way. And she has no frame of reference at all. And to him, this is nothing. And to her, it's the biggest, most impressive thing she's ever seen. So he is, he can see that in the center, there is a massive mound that seems to be the like center of everything. And he's thinking, okay, if there is a weapon anywhere, it's definitely going to be kept in a place of honor in the middle of it all. And that's probably where I need to go. And he heads there, and it's really difficult. The Ghost River branched out among the artificial hills like a spider's web, gradually ramifying into marshes indistinguishable from grassland. And where the river did not flow, thick forests filled the flat regions between the mounds. Tanto was constantly trudging through the mud, wading through water, fighting his way through thick brambles, or climbing up the side of one of the mounds when the vegetation below proved too thick. So he's dealing with like a lot of different stuff. Insects and weird smells and fruit that's tempting him, but he's pretty sure is poisonous. And he dug for grubs and insects to supplement his diet. Once in a while, if he was lucky, he managed to use a slingshot to kill a bird or hare. And he roasted these over fire pits, grateful for the rich nourishment. Many sights along the way puzzled him. Stone steps built into the sides of some of the barrows, indicating they had once been climbed, perhaps often. He passed wide-open plazas of packed earth and gravel, empty except for a few large broken rocks. Steep, planar faces at the tops of the mounds varied, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and some remained ovalish from bottom to top, looking more like natural hills. And there are like openings and stuff that maybe were dwellings, and he's sort of tempted to like explore them, but he's afraid he's going to get lost. So in the shadow of one large tumulus, he passed through a field filled with stone heaps, miniature versions of the barrows. Most had become overgrown with weeds and vines, and the harsh winters had reduced many to mere rubble. As he wound his way between them, he experienced the strange sensation of being watched. He whipped about, but there was nothing. No bird, beast, nor man. Goosebumps appeared on his arms, though it was a hot afternoon, and a chill tingled along his spine. He began to run. It was similar to the sensation he had felt when he visited the small graveyard at the end of Kiri Valley, where Admiral Mitu Rosso and the other deceased of Dara had been interred after the custom of their homeland. Thera always took the boys there on the day of the grave mending festival to clear off weeds and repair the logograms on the tablets marking the tombs. Both Tanto and Rokiri had hated it. And I'm really curious, I'm assuming that they hated it because it was super creepy, but also, they seemed very resistant to anything from Dara. And I have to imagine that was also part of it. But I do enjoy the idea that there is just a vibe in places like this that is kind of oppressive. And this is something that I think a lot of us, those of us who believe in like ghosts and spirits and presences, a lot of us have experienced moments where there is absolutely no solid evidence that you were in a room with a presence for real. But you know you were. And there is just an extra sense that can like feel it. That something in the air changed. That there is, you know, that energy that when there used to be like tube televisions and the TV was on, but there was nothing on the screen. And yet you knew the TV was on. Even though the screen was dark, there was a very kind of low vibrational, almost a sound or a current in the air. And you knew, even though the screen was dark, there was power in the machine itself. It wasn't about whether the screen was showing you something. And that's what I like to compare it to, because when you think about how to tell if a TV's on, you can hear it, you can see it. But that's not exactly what was going on. Maybe it was sound-based, but it wasn't the kinds of sound you would expect to be helpful. Something like that feels almost below human hearing. So I think that, I've always been somebody who has believed in ghosts anyway. And every time I've talked to people about it, the example that I cite is simply, when we look at the sky, we are seeing stars that have died already. Those stars are already gone, but we're still seeing them as if they're still there. Because light is weird and travels in ways that are outside of the realm of our understanding up until very recently. And I don't see why ghosts can't be a similar effect of a type of matter we don't fully understand traveling in a way that we don't comprehend. And maybe one day we will. And we simply don't right now. And it's just that simple. Like, I don't think necessarily we could call it supernatural even. It's just something that we don't get yet. So anyway, I just kind of enjoyed this little moment because, it's one thing to just feel like, oh, this is kind of creepy, but it's another thing to be so sure something's watching you that you literally begin to sprint. That's a very, very different experience. So he gets to these straight edge plots. He found the earth had been divided into long, narrow rows with low banks of stones. Soil had covered the stones, and because of the difference in elevation and water, different types of plants grew on the peaks and in the troughs. Occasionally, he came across human skeletons on the side of a mound or by the shore of a stream. The lack of pelts or other clothing indicated they'd been dead a long time, and the unfamiliar bone and stone implements near the remains showed they were likely not members of the scrubland tribes, or at least not Aegon. And he's taking them apart, seeing if there's anything useful, and he writes some Dara logograms because it makes him feel closer to his mother. And I really liked that detail as well because it's such a true thing that stuff that you just had no interest in and you didn't really understand, when you find yourself in a position where your parent is either lost or on the edge of being lost, you just really start to see it in a different way. So he finds himself in a fog at one point, and he climbs up to the top of a tall barrow so that he can sort of see where he is. And there's a circular platform with etchings on the edges of it. He tried to sleep on the side of a barrow, preferably sheltered in one of the stone-lined caves. He developed a rash along the inside of his thigh that refused to go away. He fell sick from a skull cup of water that hadn't been filtered as well as he should have, and lay in a delirium until he recovered. He lost count of the number of days he had been in Tatan Rio Alvovo. He cried at night, and he realized he had gone too far to turn back. So he is starting to get to the point where he thinks he's going to give up. In the morning, I'll climb up the nearest barrow and die in the gaze of the eye of Kujufin. And he climbs up and he looks in the direction of the sun, and he realizes that he is at the largest mound. But once he gets to the top, he can't find a way in. There's nothing that he can tell to get inside of the thing. And he starts crying. I felt so bad because this is the kind of thing where, as much as it's not fun to read about somebody trying a lot of things alone and not succeeding and then breaking down in tears over and over again, I really sympathize. When you've just got your heart sort of set on something and you've taken it on and it's going to be hard and maybe it's not going to go the way you want, there's still, such a part of you that's like, but I'm the hero here. And it's just very disappointing. He feels like the gods are mocking him a little bit. And I was like, I fucking get that. So he keeps going, though. Even though he stops and cries, he picks himself up. From the apex, he surveyed the base of the mound with care. The long axis of the mound ran north-south, and on each of the shorter sides, after a short gap of packed earth, were fields of small stone heaps that reminded him of the graveyard in Kiri Valley. And then he sees something unusual. There are these like areas that are sort of a different color. The grassland is like this dark green, and then there are areas that are a little bit of a lighter green. The kind of grass that grew in the patch was unlike anything he had seen. In the sunlight, the broad circular leaves seemed to bob up and down as though they were floating. So what we find out is going on here is that these are the surface of it, like those are lily pads, right? Potentially lotus flowers. I don't know. The vegetal surface gave the appearance of monotonous uniformity. Underneath, the grass seas were every bit as complex and variegated as their aquatic counterparts. So what would happen is that these little creatures would create tunnels. Gophers and voles and moles burrowed mazes of tunnels in the soil, subsisting on roots and tubers and grubs and worms. Some of them lived solitary lives, and they excavated immense underground chambers. From time to time, these palaces collapsed from herds trampling overhead or overambitious excavation, and the cave-ins left craters. And the rodents would leave, and the rain would come and fill the place with water and drown the grass at the bottom, and it would form this waterproof layer that would keep the water from seeping out again. And then it would continue to rain and continue to fill until eventually all of this growth happened over the top, and things would be like rotting in the water, but there would also be life happening. And they were traps for unwary navigators of grass seas. Though migrating herds sometimes used them as sources of drinking water, it was not uncommon for calves and lambs, or even the occasional adult animal, to slip into one and drown. The people of the scrublands called these pools in the grass seas water bubbles, and some of the larger, deeper bubbles persisted for years, claiming skeleton after skeleton. So Tanto sinks, and it, like, tastes nasty. He's feeling like he wants to gag, and he opens his eyes and he realizes that the water is like super clear actually, and he's really surprised. So he's able to see the way up to the surface fairly simply, and he kicks his way back up, but on the way he saw something. So he takes off his pack, which turns out to be a mistake, but I really thought it was the right thing to do at the time, just like him. And he goes back down to the bottom, and there's a skeleton down there, and it's pointing. And he feels like this is a sign, and he's feeling, and there's stone underneath, which is a really unusual, Now, I'm thinking that this water bubble is not caused by rodents. I'm thinking this is the barrow's entrance as it was traditionally built that got covered in this way over time. He broke the surface and gulped for air as he considered his options. And he's like, you know what? I have to go do this. Like, this feels like a sign. The skeleton was literally pointing at it. So he goes down there and he's pulling himself through, and he feels like he's gotten stuck and is running out of air, and finally is like, you know what? I think I'm going to have to give up. And just as he's thinking, I'm about to drown, he breaks through the surface, and he is in this really dark cavern, and he can see all these little lights, which I think turn out to be mushrooms that are luminescent. And he is just looking around like, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I was shown how to come in here. But the thing is, he isn't super smart about keeping track of the way he came in, because there are so many tunnels and so many caverns, and it's all dark, that he isn't sure which is the way he came in to be able to get out again and get access to his supplies. And he also is having trouble figuring out what to eat. He manages to catch some of the like luminescent fish because they're not used to being fished. So he is able to catch them fairly easily. But overall, the situation that he finds himself in here, it's like a major step forward that feels really exciting, but it doesn't seem to have produced any material results. And I feel like, well, all I could think here was about like playing a video game. And I think a lot of us who have played games have wound up in spots where we've discovered something and it felt like a big deal. And we're like, ooh, probably this means. And then you wander around and you don't know what you're supposed to find. You don't know if there's like a secret compartment somewhere, or do I have to like pick something up and put it somewhere and then it'll trigger a thing. And that's kind of how I felt with him in this scene, was just he was shown how to get in, and it feels like this was a big deal. But when he's wandering around, there's an aimlessness, you know, and he keeps thinking maybe this is a weapon and picking things up, and they are all just like crumbling to dust. And it's just, eventually he realizes he doesn't know how to get back out again, and the water is really cold, so he winds up with a chill that becomes difficult to shake. And he lay down telling himself he would rest his eyes a bit. He was asleep before his eyes were even fully closed. When he woke, he felt feverish and lightheaded. His limbs felt heavy and his joints ached. He was lost and hadn't done a very good job of taking care of himself. And he is starting to be like, all right, you know what? I am going to have to get the fuck out of here. I have to find a way out. But he's really not in good shape. And there's like animals around that are starting to freak him out. And he is so desperate for water that he licks the wall because it's wet. And he winds up tripping balls because he's like had some of the mushroom inadvertently. And he finds this platform, and there are these two skeletons there, arranged with the feet of each next to the head of the other. Around them were arranged more of the strange, useless weaponry he had seen too much of already. But there was something odd about these weapons. Were they longer? So he accidentally knocks over this pot that was buried with them, and he thinks that it's like seeds and takes a bite, and it's rancid and horrible. And this is really when he starts to be like, this was all for nothing. And he lays down next to them. He closed his eyes and fell into a deep slumber from which he knew he would not waken. And I'm like, yeah, you will. I'm not concerned. He's absolutely going to come out. This is just such a, you know, he is reliant on himself. He's on a real quest. He has literally kind of traveled to an underworld. This is just all the hallmarks of a hero's journey. And the feeling of like being at your wit's end and not knowing where to turn next and accepting death, I think, is a part of it. So do I know how he's going to make it through? No, but I assume he will wake up, and whatever like terrible, I don't know what to call it, like this sort of feeling of hopelessness will have passed, or something will have changed. So then we go to chapter 6, and this is a really weird thing. So I was so confused about what happened with Thera at the end of the last chapter. And we find out that Takval, he was the one that was on the garinafin that dove at her. And that her garinafin, Gaal, had called out in the way that they can and summoned help. So what it was a regular tusked tiger. It wasn't what I thought was like a god in animal form. He tells her the tusked tiger is known to stun its victims with a silent roar. Word? That's crazy. like, it's just such a matter-of-fact thing, the way that he says it. And it just felt to me like just such a wild statement. I mean, and we find out later, like, this is also something that people who have swum with whales have experienced from, like, whale calls that apparently are otherwise inaudible. They still, like, have an effect. And I am desperate to know if this is based on something, because it feels like such a specific thing. And, you know, at one point there's a mention of, like, the sound that the garinafin makes that they can't actually hear feels kind of like a purr. And, you know, there have been suggestions, I think studies have shown that, like, there is a frequency to purring that can help in, like, healing. And I don't know how much real science is behind that, but it's one of those things that get tossed around by cat people who like to just love their cats and create reasons why. And the fact that Thera experienced this, like, spiritual moment, and it was from an animal attacking her and instilling this, like, feeling of well-being into her in an artificial way, understandably kind of fucks her up. And to find out, like, that it was a chemical thing, perhaps, she winds up sort of telling herself everything that we feel is, like, the result of some sort of chemical reaction, and that doesn't make them not real, which I do appreciate, but it still does feel kind of like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, yes and no is really where I come down on that. And it's the kind of thing that, like, I was talking about this on a Jane the Virgin episode. I know it's a weird connection to be making right now, but there is a moment where her mother is explaining to her that sometimes with a person, you think that you're in love, and what you have is this, like, chemical thing that is very easy to mistake for love. And, you know, if you use this kind of thinking that Thera is falling into here, you could make the argument that, like, well, maybe you're not mistaking it for love. Maybe it is love and a chemical thing. But I personally have gone through that sort of thing, and looking back realize, no, the chemical thing was like a hormone attraction. It definitely was not love. Now that I experienced love that was real, I can look back and I can tell that's not what that was. But in the moment, there is no way you could have tried to tell me when I was in the grips of that chemical experience that it wasn't love. I would have been deeply offended and disgusted that you presume to know me well enough. But now I am aware what I was experiencing was an obsessive attraction, which is not the same thing at all. And to me, it's just a really tricky line, you know, to figure out exactly. And this is what's so scary in a lot of ways about being a person, is finding out how at the whims of our hormones we are. And just, you know, how depression, it can be just like an imbalance of certain chemicals in your brain, and then you want to die, or you want other people to die, or any number of things can go wrong. And it's like such a small thing that is almost undetectable, but it makes your life exponentially harder. And how unfair that is, that we're just at the mercy of these glands that excrete chemicals in response to certain things. And this is like a major thing with social media as well. There have been so many studies about the release of dopamine in response to, like, you know, reacts or hearts or likes or comments. And I fucking experience that hard, especially with my line of work. It is a really difficult thing to manage, because you do get a burst of happiness, and it is a very, like, immediate gratification sort of thing. And then it's gone so quickly. And now you need another one. And you do get full on dependent on it. And I just really personally am always thinking about this topic and the concept of like how much of this is quote real and how much isn't. And there's no real way to know, and there's no real way to differentiate between real and not real unless you like get the clear vision of being able to look back on it. And by then, a lot of times it doesn't matter. It's in the moment that you wish you could discern. But in the moment is when your judgment is the least reliable. Anyway, I'm sorry to go off on this top, but it's just like, it's a very fascinating thing to me. And I find it really scary. So Takval, concerned that Ga'al's desperate cries for help had also given away their location to Liuku search parties still in the area, intensified patrols of the surrounding peaks. And they don't see any Liuku pursuers, but I also want to touch on the fact that they did have some scouts who disappeared a little while ago. And I just have a bit of like an itch on the back of my neck, feeling like something's going on with those people who bailed. And I don't know what to think. I really don't. And Araten is coming to report to them and stuff. And it meant a lot that he like made up with Thera, but there's a part of me that isn't sure he can be trusted still. I don't know what to think here. So this is when she starts talking to Kami. Some pearl divers in Wolf's Paw told me that when diving in the vicinity of giant whales, sometimes they would suddenly feel they were in the presence of Tazu. A dangerous lassitude and languor seized them like a giant hand underwater. They insisted that they heard no whale song. And there is like something about this. I feel like it could be like important and we should look into it. So what they decide to do here is begin a series of experiments. And they begin to reward the garinafin for making these different sounds. And they make sure to only reward them when they make a new sound that they haven't heard yet. And gradually it begins to be clear like they're running out of noises. But the garinafin are very smart and they are understanding what is being demanded of them. So they're trying to work to get their little treats. I'm sorry. I forgot about this moment where Thera talks to the shaman and she says, "Is it possible for you to teach me the mysteries?" And Ajulek says, "Our mysteries are reserved for the children of Afir." "I am an Aegon by marriage," said Thera. "Is it not the custom of the scrublands to adopt the willing stranger into the tribes? Surely the gods will not reject me simply because I became a child of Afir instead of being born as one." The shaman looked at her for a long time, and then with the barest hint of a smile curving the corners of her mouth, she nodded and held out her hand. And I do like this moment, because even though Thera has been shaken by finding out that, like, maybe the experience that she had wasn't what it seemed, it's still producing an interest. And now she's going to be pursuing this in a different way. And I think that's, there's potential there for some really interesting stuff. So, right, and then Araten comes back with news. And this is such a risky thing. Araten is being asked to basically, like, spy. And I am super concerned that this guy is going to wind up caught or that he is fucking with them somehow in a way that I don't know. I just feel uneasy. I really do. I want to believe that this is for real, but there's a part of me that is so... we got burned already in a very literal way. I don't want to see that happen again. So she's asking him what Kuju's guesses are in terms of when to go back through the Wall of Storms. And it turns out there's a lot of different schools of thought that are sort of like in competition with each other, which reassures Thera, because the fact that they are all coming at it from totally different angles suggests that nobody has figured out there's a way to calculate it. And they're all guessing via like signs and portents or God knows what. But there's one particular faction that is really close to correct. And what Thera wants is for Aratan to go back to this group and begin to spread rumors of some of the other dates being more likely to be correct. And I'm not sure how he's planning to do this. I'm going to go ahead and say, like, maybe somebody's going to spread that they had a dream that seems portentous somehow. But either way, it is a big risk, and he is feeling obviously a little bit conflicted about doing this. The later the better. The last faction in your summary must not be allowed to win the debate. A complicated look of resignation mixed with other emotions, both lighter and darker in tone, appeared on Aratan's face. Thera felt terrible. The old warrior must be dreading going back into danger again. I don't think that's it, Thera. Sweetie, I think you just told him when the correct day is, or not day, but like period is, and he low-key doesn't want to betray you, but he's gonna have to. Like, that for me felt like he is doing something unwillingly with Thera, not Kuju. I don't know. Kuju didn't feel super clever when we were in his head, but that is not to say that like it couldn't be possible for somebody else to come up with this plan somehow, or for Aratan to use Thera to get this information to then wiggle into his good graces going back. I don't know. And Aratan is thinking to use Gaal to go back, but Takval is like, nah, if you're trying to pretend that you're like these pacifists, having a garinafin is not going to make any sense. So Aratan is like, yeah, that is legit. That's a good point. And they head out and they promise to come back at the end of the next month. But, ooh, there's just something about this that makes me fucking really worried. So, okay. Sorry, I was like, already had started talking about the experiments and got way ahead of myself. But, yeah. So, there's this moment with Cammy, and I don't remember any, like, particular description of Cammy, and I know that Thera is with Takval and happy, but there's something about Cammy's, like, spirit of curiosity that reminds me of Zomi, and I was like, is she gonna start to kind of have a thing for Cammy? Like, I don't know. But anyway, they begin to have the garinafins make different sounds, and then eventually Gaal stretches out his neck and he stares into space, and then he looks at them like he expects a treat, which having recently been training dogs, there is a look that they get when they have done a thing that they have been taught to do, and they fully believe they are about to get a reward for it. And you're like, oh, right, hold on. Because you're trying to reward that behavior. And if you get caught flat-footed, it can be a little bit difficult to keep the good behavior up, because they realize like, oh, well, maybe I won't get a treat, so fuck it. But none of them heard anything. So she's like, wait a minute. And she's realizing too that because they rewarded these garinafin for making different noises and not for repeating themselves, that getting him to do it again is going to be a really tricky prospect. So she then is like, you know what? And she climbs onto his back and she uses this command, peta peta, which is the command for a garinafin to repeat a maneuver in battle. And he repeats the sound. And Thera yells, "Yeehaw," which is hilarious. And because she does it each time he makes the sound again, he begins to hear "Yeehaw" as the command to make the sound, which is very handy. And this is the kind of thing that I really want to begin working on more with Pippin, is vocal commands. And I know I can do some right now, but it's so inconsistent. The thing with puppies is getting them to focus long enough that they process. And it's just repetition, which is very tedious. But this moment is just, there's something so funny to me about the accidental command of "yeehaw" becoming the thing. And I'm really curious what this sound is going to do, because so she can feel the sound in his throat when he's making it, even though she can't hear it. Thera leaned against Gaal's neck and wrapped her arms around the leathery skin. She relaxed, putting as much of her own body in contact with the garinafin as possible. Her heartbeat slowed down. The deep pulses of the inaudible song seemed to fill her with an overwhelming sense of peace, a feeling of being cradled in the palm of a loving presence that would protect her from all harm. "Wake up, princess, wake up!" Thorio's worried cries jolted her back to reality. She took deep breaths as though emerging from a sea. "I'm all right. I just need a few moments." Wow. This, to me, honestly sounds like the fucking, fifth generation, what is it called? Fifth age weapon. This is wild. And this is when she's like, "And I didn't come into contact with the divine, but merely an illusion of it." Disappointment flooded her heart. And for a moment, she's caught up in how sad that is. And then there's this beautiful moment with a rainbow and seeing the water refracting the light. Beauty, drunkenness, and love weakness are also mind pleasures derived from the senses. But that doesn't mean they aren't real, that they don't describe some deeper truth. Knowing that a garinafin relies on fermented gas to breathe fire enhances the wonder of the sight with understanding. Knowing that monsters are summoned with smoke craft augments the thrill of wanting to be frightened with recognition of skill. Knowing that a story is a filtered and constructed view of reality complements the joy of a tale well told with appreciation of craft. Knowing that grace and pulchritude and charm and affection are rooted in the flesh only make it more marvelous to descry in them reflections of the invisible soul, to hear in them echoes of the inaudible spirit, to feel in them traces of the incorruptible. And I mean, okay, look, yes and no. That's what I went over this already. It's fine. Who's to say the divine can't also be experienced through the mundane? That the numinous isn't also based on the knowable? You know what? I just realized I don't know what numinous means. Let's look. Dictionary. Having a strong religious or spiritual quality, indicating or suggesting the presence of a divinity. Okay. I like that. Yes. After dissecting the dead garinafin, the living creature still inspires. After weighing the fish, the Dairon's dance remains indescribable. And this is sort of an interesting thing, too, because I have had the experience of finding out how a thing works and suddenly being less impressed with it. But I also have had the experience of finding out how a thing works and being more impressed with it, because it's so far outside of an idea that I would have had myself. So I get where she's coming from, but it's just it's so flexible and subjective, and it's just completely dependent on the context. So anyway, Cammy is finishing with a wave of sound in which pulses are so far apart, they're beyond our ability to hear, yet it has the power to affect our bodies, much like earthquake tremors. And they're all very, like, impressed at having figured this out. But Tokval doesn't really get why. They're talking about this, and he's like, we have known for a long time that garinafins can talk to each other like that. I don't understand why y'all are, like, so psyched. This isn't new information. And Thera's like, but you didn't know how. And he says, well, why would we? Like, first of all, it's not useful. And if anything, it's been kind of a problem. Like, bad-tempered garinafins will use sounds we can't hear to fuck with other garinafins and cause everybody to act up, which really can be, like, outright dangerous for trainers. It's not a habit we like to encourage. And she says maybe the silent roar of the tusked tiger is really... Thera stopped. There were just too many unknowns for her to speculate responsibly. Still, she was extremely pleased that she, Kami, and Thorio had figured out the mechanism behind a mystery on their own. The Scrublands seemed just a little bit more like home now. And I do like that a lot, that the idea of, like, discovering something like this in a place that has felt so alien in so many ways would just kind of give you a little bit of comfort. Tokval knew the inaudible sound traveled long distances through the ground, and in fact, garinafins in the wild would communicate with each other this way, especially when terrain or distance made normal calls useless. Now, even if their band were divided up into groups, it was possible to send messages to each other across long distances. Once he explained the idea to the other Aegon warriors, they were all suitably impressed. The seemingly frivolous experiments of the Dara scholar and the princess had led to a new tactic in garinafin warfare. And it really is just so typical that, like, they did this experiment, they found this thing out, and everybody's like, oh, what's the point? And then someone's like, well, we could use it for making war, and everybody's like, oh, sweet, never mind, totally legit. So depressing. I get it, we gotta be practical, but also, you know what I'm saying? Anyway, well, turns out I had no problem making an hour out of that. I should have known. But thank you very much, Kyle, for commissioning this. Appreciate you. Thank you for your patience. Sorry I had to start so late. Thank you to Ms. T also for hanging out and your patience as well with me having all these computer issues. I appreciate you all so much. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.